I am. I'm a naturalist. I lean more to the sort of Mordecai Kaplan school of thought. In my opinion, the God, at least of the Bible, is definitely a metaphor. A metaphor for what? That's an interesting question. On the one hand, I could say it's a metaphor for our kind of highest ethical aspirations. We project onto this image of God that we have in our minds the things about ourselves that we want to be better at, the things about ourselves that we want to kind of aspire to. Is there a literal consciousness to the universe? I really don't believe that. The universe is a big, complex place made up of many, many sort of chemical reactions and so on. And while that's very impersonal, it's also beautiful in the fact that, in spite of all of that supposed randomness, our Earth and our populace came out of that in so many different cultures and so many different expressions of even nature. So in my opinion, the God of the Bible is most definitely a metaphor for that complexity, both the ethical complexity, as we are self-aware human beings, and also the complexity of a huge world that's so much bigger than we can really comprehend, at least in one lifetime. I had been studying Judaism. I'd read a book by a pastor, actually a Grand Rapids pastor by the name of Rob Bell, and the book was called Velvet Elvis. And one of the things that I really liked about the book, none of it had to do with Jesus. The book itself did, but all of his sort of best points were quotes that he took from first century rabbis or by giving the New Testament a sort of Old Testament context. And I thought that was fascinating. And I honestly found that more interesting than the apostles or, Jesus himself even. And so I started studying Judaism. I studied Judaism for a couple years. I think my family had kind of always hoped that I would go into a seminary kind of context and maybe become a pastor. And the more I studied and the more I learned about religion, the more I kind of realized that I was more at home, at least intellectually, in a context like Judaism. When I moved to Grand Rapids, it was kind of an awesome opportunity because I moved right across the street from a Reform synagogue, and I'd never been before. And a really good friend of mine, actually a friend of mine who's Catholic, said, I will totally go with you. So we went together, and I started going to services regularly. And after a while, I kind of realized, this is more home for me. And so, then conversations with the rabbi, one thing led to another, and before you knew it, I was studying. But one of the things that I really liked about progressive Judaism was its willingness to say that just because something worked 500 years ago, 600 years ago, 700 years ago, and beyond, doesn't necessarily mean that it's relevant today. Not because it didn't work then, but simply because times change and people change.